my great honor to welcome you today to this panel organized by the Voice of America on Bosnia 20 years after Srebrenica. The genocide in Srebrenica, the worst mass killing in Europe after World War II, was a seminal event for Bosnia, the wider Balkan region, and for American and European policymakers. The political landscape in the Balkans has changed rather dramatically since the mid-1990s. Bosnia, as well as the other Balkan countries, have made remarkable progress, and this progress has been achieved largely due to U.S. involvement and U.S. leadership. But despite the progress, Bosnia is plagued by many internal and external problems that continue to present significant risks to its stability as well as democratic development. Bosnia, unfortunately, is a weak, fragile country, and its future as a viable state remains rather uncertain. We are very fortunate today to have a panel of distinguished experts to discuss these important issues. The panel will be moderated by my esteemed colleague, Jelena Pecanin-Allison, chief of our very successful Bosnian service. For the last 2 decades, our Bosnian service has served as an objective and impartial channel of open communication and information, and has become a permanent feature of the media scene in Bosnia. I would like to acknowledge and welcome Mr. Emin Chohodarevic, Counselor at the Embassy of Bosnia, Dusan Vujacevic, First Counselor of the Serbian Embassy, Ambassador Srđan Darmatovic of Montenegro, Ambassador of Albania, Floreta Faber, and we also expect the Ambassador of Kosovo, Akan Ismaili. We are really delighted that you have joined us. And before we go to Jelena, I am very pleased to invite Kelu Chao, our Acting Director of the Voice of America, to make a few remarks. Thank you. Kelu?
Thank you very much for coming and take part in this very important discussion. Since its launch in 1996, VOA's Bosnian service has been a leading international broadcaster in the targeted region, attracting 17.4% audience weekly. Credibility is the biggest asset of the VOA Bosnian service. VOA takes great pride in our objective, timely, accurate, and balanced reporting. This is particularly important in countries such as Bosnia. As we know, a country deeply divided along ethnic lines and struggling to address the many challenges stemming from war in the 1990s. VOA Bosnia, through its multimedia programming, focuses on promoting peace and stability, ethnic reconciliation, regional cooperation, and NATO-EU integration. This panel is part of VOA's continuing effort to serve as a forum for exchange of ideas, information, and meaningful debate on important political, economic, and social issues. I'm looking forward to a very inspiring and exciting discussion. Now, our moderator, VOA Bosnia Service Chief Jelena Pecanin-Allison.
Eles, Kelu, thank you very much for the nice words about Bosnian service. Yes, we are very proud of our Bosnian service, and we're going to be celebrating 20 years next year. In 20 years since the genocide, international investigators, human rights activists, criminal pathologists, and the institutions of European justice have documented the event, remembered the victims, and tried some of the perpetrators. Almost all of them. But despite the meticulous examination of the past, what Srebrenica means today is a matter of controversy. And what it means for Bosnia's future remains uncertain. Though at peace, as my esteemed colleagues reminded everybody, Bosnia remains a divided country. It is many would not hesitate to call it failed country, failed state. Its development and recovery from the war made more difficult by the fragile, very fragile political situation. And while examining the past has often proved the way forward for many, like the Truth Commissions in South Africa, Rwanda, or El Salvador, Srebrenica's past remains a point of tension rather than an opportunity for reconciliation. Resolutions to label, once again, as an act of genocide, the systematic killing of Bosnian Muslim men, including the elderly and the young, have been denounced by leaders in Republic of Srpska, some of whom have even threatened, a couple of days ago, renewed acts of violence over this issue. And as most of us probably know, at this very moment in the Security Council in New York, they are still debating the vote on Srebrenica genocide. And we just have the latest, and if you don't mind, I would share it with you. The United Kingdom is outraged that Russia has vetoed the resolution today. So we have the veto. The resolution has been vetoed by Russia. I just want to finish before I introduce our distinguished guests, panelists today, just to say on March 15, 2004, I was the moderator for a similar panel in this same room, when one of the speakers was at the time State Department War Crimes Ambassador Pierre-Richard Prosper. After that panel, I thought never again probably will we talk about this issue and Bosnia moving forward, because I believe that by now, 2015, the country would not be an issue any longer. And it still is maybe now more than even before, maybe more than 5, 6, 7 years ago, in part also because of the rise of the Islamic radicalism in the region. I would like now to introduce our panelists: Ambassador Stephen J. Rapp, State Department, War Crimes Office, Ambassador at Large for the War Crimes; Ambassador Kurt Volker, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, and today with the McCain Institute; Professor Daniel Serwer of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, Senior Fellow at Center for Transatlantic Relations and with the Middle East Institute, and with us via Skype from Skopje, Macedonia, and going to Srebrenica later on is Professor Tanya Domi, adjunct professor of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs and affiliate faculty member of the Harriman Institute. Ms. Domi teaches human rights, among other things, teaches human rights in the Western Balkans. Thank you very much again for being with us today. And I would like Ambassador Rapp to speak first, please. We asked our guests to keep their initial remarks to 5 minutes, but we will definitely forgive longer than that to the guests like this.
Well, thank you very much to the Voice of America, and it's great to be part of this panel today. Tragic, as we recall the events in Srebrenica just 20 years ago, the murder of 8,000 Muslim men and boys. And the efforts to establish justice for those crimes continue. I'll be back in Srebrenica this weekend with others, joining as before in processions where the identified remains of now, I think it may be around 7,000 of these victims will be interred, and that effort continues with the support of the American government to the International Commission on Missing Persons to allow families to know what happened finally to their sons, to their brothers, to their husbands, and to bring them to final rest. But none of us can rest while the needs for justice remain. There has been progress, and it's been slow, but it's been steady, and it's been strongly supported by the U.S. government on a bipartisan basis, particularly through the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, where now some 15 persons have been convicted for responsibility for the crime at Srebrenica, several explicitly for the crime of genocide. There are still, of course, on trial as we speak, Ratko Mladic, whom it took us 15 years, and intense pressure and work with regional authorities and work with our partners in Europe. Particularly, I want to salute the Dutch government, which insisted that before Serbia in particular could move forward into the European community, into the Stabilization Pact for the EU and eventually into membership, there had to be full and complete cooperation with the ICTY. That pressure, that conditionality, our own pressure and work with our European allies and with good people in Serbia and throughout the region resulted, after some 12 years, in the arrest of Radovan Karadzic, the political leader of Republika Srpska in the 1990s, whose trial has now been completed in The Hague, and we're waiting for judgment in the next several months. Ratko Mladic, it took until, I remember well the day, May 26th, 2011. It's certainly one of the happiest days I've had in my duties for the State Department and in this whole field of international justice when he was arrested and flown to The Hague to face trial. His health has recovered, frankly. He's in better health today than he was in 2011. His trial would probably be concluded now, but for the discovery of another mass grave in Bosnia, and the prosecution appropriately reopened the case, and in the last several days has presented evidence about the alleged responsibility of Mladic for that crime. But soon his trial will be concluded. He's finishing his defense of the other charges, and we'll have judgment in that one. But even more important have been what's happened in the region, because as we all know from the point of view of justice, what happens 1,000 miles away from our home by judges from other countries is not as meaningful to us as what happens in our own countries. The United States strongly supported the establishment of the Bosnian State Court, one of the state institutions that represents all of the Bosnian state and has judges from all parts of that state. And for a period of time through 2012 had international judges who've now phased out their role. But that court continues to deliver judgments of responsibility explicitly for genocide, for the crimes committed in Srebrenica, and for other crimes as well committed in Bosnia during the conflict between 1992 and 1995. Of equal and perhaps even greater significance is the fact that through regional cooperation, cases have been pursued in Serbia. We had, of course, the case involving the Scorpions when the tape came forward, which included the horrendous acts that unit had committed across Bosnia in 1995. But within that tape, which was played during the Milosevic trial, we had the actual filming of the killing of several of the Srebrenica victims, boys, by the men of the Scorpions. That resulted in convictions in Serbia, and most recently, through the kind of cooperation that we've encouraged and supported between the Bosnian and Serbian war crimes prosecutors, cases have been filed in Serbia for persons resident in Serbia that are alleged responsible for killing Muslim men and boys at Srebrenica. But this effort must continue, and what's been achieved through the judicial process needs to be recognized. Among that, of course, is that we're dealing with the worst crimes known to humankind, the intentional destruction of a whole group, eliminating the men and boys, the ability of that group to survive in the vicinity of Srebrenica. That was so clearly found by the ICTY, first in the Krstić case in 2002, and in subsequent proceedings, most recently in Popovic, to be the crime of genocide. Of course, genocide is a specific crime that we know as the crime of crimes, but I never, because I've prosecuted in other places, like in Sierra Leone, where we didn't have genocide, but still tens of thousands of people killed. I've been just in Cambodia. I've been there 7 times, where 2 million people were killed. And the predominant crime wasn't genocide. It was political destruction of what they perceived to be political enemies. So the fact that there are crimes against humanity committed and war crimes committed, intentionally going after innocent civilians and for murder and for other acts of violence. These are horrendous crimes as well, and each of the convictions in the ICTY and in the other national courts and state courts have found that the crime, that aside from genocide, we also had war crimes and crimes against humanity. Of course, there's still those that deny these crimes, and I just heard, as we all did, the news that the Russians have, like denying that the earth is round, have denied that it was genocide at Srebrenice. This is not a subject that is subject to dispute. It's been legally established, not just by the ICTY, but also by the International Court of Justice in the Bosnia and Serbia case. But we need to go forward from this point and work with the victims of these crimes to help them repair their lives. We need to do what we can to send the strong message that the crimes of ethnic cleansing, of which, I mean, there is not an explicit crime of ethnic cleansing, but the genocide, the persecution as a crime against humanity, the intentional infliction of violence on the civilian population and on persons not engaged in combat, these were all ways in which certain forces attempted to destroy a particular group and also drive off that group and create an area of ethnic homogeneity. There isn't a possibility in our world to create states in which everybody is exactly alike, and it's not a good thing either. And we should always be careful about anything that rewards those that hope to expand their territory at the expense of the civilian population through acts of atrocity. And so I think a part of what we need to work for is for greater integration within the region, both within Europe and internally, recognizing the common interests of people in Bosnia for a prosperous future, and a future where people can live together, whatever their ethnicity, whatever the religion they follow, together as neighbors and can build a better future. We learned a lot at Srebrenica, and those, at the time I was not involved in international justice. I was a federal prosecutor in my home state, but followed these events and were shocked when the news began to come out of the fate of these men and boys. We've learned that peacekeeping forces need to be robust. They need to put civilian protection at the highest level. And recently, when we've had other horrendous acts in places like South Sudan, when ethnic violence began, people came to the United Nations by the tens of thousands, and the resources and the protection services were there, even though the mandate itself wasn't that clear at the beginning. And so we have learned the lesson of being prepared for these horrendous crimes. And we've also, from this experience, sent a strong message that when these crimes are committed, the world will not forget. And it will use its resources and its international institutions to bring to justice those people that are responsible. And so when others are committing crimes today, and in Syria, in other places in the world, the message, I think, is loud and clear. It may not happen today. In the case of Mladic, it took, as we've noted, more than 15 years. But the day will come when persons who target the innocent, who attempt to destroy whole groups on whatever motivation, that those people will face justice. And I think out of Srebrenica, the world has gained powerful lessons that all of us need to implement every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rapp. Ambassador Volker?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. I want to first thank Ambassador Rapp for all the work that you're doing. I think it's really important that the U.S. government and others stay focused on these issues of pursuing crimes against humanity and ensuring that at the end of the road there is justice. So I really appreciate you doing that.
Thank you.
We at the McCain Institute have one of your predecessors on board now, Clint Williamson. Ambassador Clint Williamson is with us, who was both Ambassador at Large for War Crimes issues and also a prosecutor at the ICTY. And so that's an issue that we continue to have some long-standing interest in. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here, in part because it was a good chance to reflect a little bit on some of the meaning of Srebrenica, both at the time and what we should be learning from this today. And what I kind of feel looking at this is that we haven't necessarily learned some of the things we were supposed to learn. At the time, as we reacted to the events in Srebrenica, we were outraged. We could not believe that something so brazen, rounding up 7,000, 8,000, more than 8,000 men and boys and killing them in the space of a few days could happen. And it prompted us to action, where we had been involved in trying to navigate the Serbian-Croatian War and then the Bosnian War over a period of time and not done so successfully. But Srebrenica was kind of an action-forcing event for us. We've got to stop this. That was, as I said, 7,000 to 8,000, more than 8,000 people killed in a space of a few days. We've seen close to 300,000 people now killed in Syria. We've seen over 6,000 people killed in Ukraine, not all in one day. But these are acts of violence on a scale not that different from Srebrenica in the case of Ukraine and vastly greater in the case of Syria. And you mentioned Cambodia earlier time. I don't perceive this level of outrage that we had at the time about Srebrenica. And I don't perceive this call to action to stop it. And so I think that's one thing that we have to think about. Why? What is it about us that has changed with these events that we are not outraged and called to action today in these cases as we were rightfully in the case of Srebrenica? That's an important question. A second point, Ambassador Rapp correctly made the point about even if it took 10 or 15, 20 years, whatever it's taking to bring people to justice who committed these crimes against humanity, we're doing it. Our ability to do it is based on the fact that there was a political and military settlement that took a hot conflict and put it back into a civil and a judicial process. That's tremendously important as well. And you think about some of the other examples there. One of the tragedies we face today is Libya. Libya, we did have an intervention. We intervened to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe in Benghazi, and we successfully removed a terrible dictator, Muammar Gaddafi. No complaints there. But what we did not do in Libya was follow through with a stabilization operation, collect weapons, assist a new government to establish rule of law, to establish a single source of security forces in the country, and begin the process whereby civil institutions and justice can again take hold. So the prospects of our doing the same thing in the case of people who have committed serious crimes in Libya, including against our own embassy, is much diminished compared to our ability to do so in Bosnia. So another lesson, a couple lessons I would draw out of this is that military intervention can be a good thing. We stopped a war in Bosnia, as we should have, and we acted faster in Kosovo, as we should have. I think that we did the right thing in intervening in Libya when we did. So military action can be a helpful thing, but in order for it to be a helpful thing, you've got to have the follow-through. You've got to have a longer-term plan for operation to create governance and stability and get things back into this civilian framework. Another thing I would say is timeliness of action is important. And I remember from my own personal experience, I was involved in the Vance-Owen negotiations in '93. And on May 2nd in Athens, 1993, we reached agreement on the Vance-Owen plan. It was signed by the Bosnian Serbs and all of the other parties. We had a deal. But there was no commitment to implementation. There was no promise of airstrikes if anyone violated. There was no international peacekeeping force. The Secretary of State at the time, Warren Christopher, was himself not persuaded that military action by the West to implement an agreement was necessary or appropriate. We teed up talking points for him to discuss this with the British government. Douglas Hurd at the time trying to get the US and the UK to lead together in implementation. We didn't do it. Within a week, the Bosnian Serb parliament, in something of a charade, said, no, we're not going to abide by this. Shelling started again within a week, and the war resumed. 2 years later, we had Srebrenica, and then we did it anyway. And that should be a lesson as well. You could have done this before Srebrenica. You could have done it when it was much easier and when many fewer lives had been lost. And that lesson, again, equally applies, for example, in Syria, when we knew where this was headed very early on. The point was made, I guess our moderator made the point about Russia vetoing the UN resolution today. That's in contrast to what you've seen in Serbia, where they have on their own now brought those accused of committing war crimes into the judiciary system inside Serbia to prosecute them for the first time. That is a remarkable contrast from denial on the one hand to a state that had been involved in these conflicts 20 years ago, creating now an acceptance of responsibility and putting it into a legal process. As imperfect as it may be, it is a significant political and psychological shift, and I think, again, only possible because of the military intervention, the peacekeeping implementation, the civilian implementation that went on subsequent to that, that has now gotten us to this point. All that being said, I agree with what many have said. It's not over in Bosnia. We're not done. We can't walk away and say this is now complete. There has not been enough healing. There has not been enough identification of the perpetrators and bringing them to justice. And I'd say most critically, there has not been a conclusive end to the political stalemate that was created by the war. It's easy to blame the Dayton Accords for this stalemate because they have institutionalized this inability to govern. But the only reason we have the Dayton Accords is because of the war, and the Dayton Accords were necessary to put in place a structure that would prevent an immediate resumption of violence. But 20 years on, it's time for us to move on. And I think we have to recognize also that the Bosnian people, Croats, Serbs, Muslims, cannot do this alone. The Dayton Accords were brought in from outside. Everyone agreed to them because it was the best option available. There's no way that without that kind of outside engagement, again, we'll ever get beyond the roadblocks that these Dayton Accords now present. As necessary as they were and as they still are, it's also necessary that we begin to move beyond to create a real governing system in Bosnia that works for all of its people. So that would be a necessary step, and I would say that the dangers of not doing so are often underestimated, because to the extent we allow a dysfunctional set of structures to persist, it allows the worst elements of those societies, nationalist, criminal gangs, bigots, people driven by ethnic or religious hatred, to pursue small agendas and to keep the country from advancing as we would all like it to as part of a modern Europe. So I think that it is time again for us to look at fixing these political processes before, again, timely action, before we end up with situations that we wish we didn't see and that will be much harder to redress later on. So those are some of my reflections on 20 years here and some of the lessons that we maybe haven't quite learned yet, but hopefully it's not too late. Thank you.
Ambassador Volker, thank you very much. I would like to ask Professor Serwer to give us his thoughts, and then we'll go to Professor Domi, and probably we will open up for questions. I'm sure there will be many. Professor Serwer.
Thank you very much. I despair of being as eloquent as the ambassadors have been, but I do want to thank VOA for all of these years of devotion to what they do and do so well. I once counted my interviews for VOA 1 year.
Don't embarrass us, Professor.
It was embarrassing. I have to admit. I have to admit. It was a little bit embarrassing. I want to underline that the writing and rewriting of wartime narratives is not something unusual. We're doing it today in the United States about a war that ended more than 150 years ago. This question of the Confederate flag is a question of narrative. It's not a question of only of historical accuracy. It's a question of what we believe in now. And so when I see forces in Bosnia trying to erase the word genocide, for example, from its history, I see a continuing of the wartime struggle, basically. And that's what we've seen in Bosnia for very good reasons, as Kurt points out, because we froze in place the warring parties, at least to some extent. I agree with Ambassador Rapp that the implications of Srebrenica have been very broad in the sense that I think it's hard to picture responsibility to protect R2P without something like Srebrenica having happened. I also agree with Ambassador Volker that, we don't react nearly as rapidly or as forcefully as I sometimes think we should. But I want to underline that the context has changed a great deal. The 1990s were the unipolar moment for the United States. Yeltsin was the leader of Russia, not Putin. It makes a big difference. And, we hadn't fought somewhat unsuccessfully 2 gigantic wars in Iraq and Afghanistan at that point. We were 10 feet tall in 1995, and people treated us that way. We're no longer 10 feet tall, and we have serious opponents, not only in Russia, but in China and elsewhere. I've been focused in this summer, actually, not on Srebrenica and on the past of Bosnia, but on its political economy today. And I've got to tell you that I'm sad to report that the facts are simply grim. And they're grim largely dating not from 1995 or 96, but dating from 2006. The first 10 years after Dayton were very successful years of peace implementation, in which the implementation was imposed, but frankly it was imposed with the consent of the governed, who were the political party leaders of Bosnia. They agreed to the bond powers. They may have talked against them, but they agreed to them, and they obeyed them for 10 years. In 2006, with the failure of the April package and the turn of Haris Saladzic towards nationalist rhetoric and response of Milorad Dodik, you see a gigantic increase in the unwillingness of the Bosnians to accept the bond powers at the same time that the international community was trying to wind them down, which was clearly a mistake, but frankly, it was a mistake that if it hadn't been made, we'd still be having trouble making the bond powers stick. The political economy in Bosnia today sustains the political parties. That's its purpose. It doesn't serve the people of Bosnia. Just before coming, I looked at a chart of credit to state-owned companies, and it takes a gigantic jump in 2006 and stays high the entire time after that. Where do you think that money is going? That money also prevents reforms, and it slows progress towards the EU. I don't see any sign that the current political leaderships in Bosnia, with some important but isolated exceptions, are serious about EU membership. They're much more serious about avoiding the fate of Ivo Sanader in Croatia. This naturally raises the difficult question of partition, which is the issue that never goes away. But I want to be very clear about this. There is no two-way partition of Bosnia. There's only a three-way partition of Bosnia. And the reasons for our opposition, U.S. opposition, to the partition of Bosnia in the mid-90s are just as valid today, if not more valid, than they were then, because we wanted to prevent the emergence of a non-viable rump Islamic republic that would provide a platform for Iranian-sponsored terrorism in Europe. Terrorism in the United States hadn't been invented yet, and nor had Sunni terrorism in the United States. So there's only a three-way partition of Bosnia. If that were to start happening, I think the reaction in the majority of the population in Bosnia would be very, very negative. Let us not imagine that most Bosnians want to split up this country. There are people who benefit from talking about that, benefit politically, but I think it's quite clear that the majority still favors a single country, and frankly, the international community does too. I don't think even Serbia would recognize an independent Republika Srpska because it would wreck its EU prospects. I can't predict what Moscow would do. It has foolishly recognized South Ossetia and annexed Crimea. This will be remembered as a period of Russian foolishness and without real outcomes. That's another reason why I think people have to understand that partition in Bosnia is not in the cards. It would have implications for Ukraine and other places that the United States and most of the world doesn't want to face. So Bosnia is, shall I say, condemned to live together. I don't think that's an awful fate. I think it's actually quite livable. But they have to start creating what Kurt has quite properly referred to as a government that is functional and serves all the people. And all I can do, and I'll disagree with Kurt a little bit. I don't think that the road to that future is paved with decisions by the High Representative. I think the High Representative, the consent for his autocratic powers, relatively autocratic powers, has been withdrawn. And I don't think we can do in 2015-16 what the High Representative did in the early 2000s when there was consent. I think the Bosnians have to find this path themselves with a lot of international help and with a lot of international encouragement. And we're going to have to be patient until they do.
Thank you very much, Professor Serwer. Professor Domi, can we have a word from you? I hope our connection will work as well as it did so far.
Me too. Thank you so very much for inviting me. It's indeed an honor to appear with VOA on this commemoration of Srebrenica, this weekend's unfortunate ritual that we witness each year. I have some thoughts, and it's in response to my colleagues who've spoken here, and given that I'm probably the only person who hasn't served as an ambassador, I'll probably take upon myself to be a little bit more straightforward in that I recall Richard Holbrooke's statement that's pretty classic about the failure in Bosnia and and he referred to the Bosnian War and the consequences, which are clearly illustrated in the genocide of Srebrenica, the greatest collective failure of the West during the late 20th century. And what is so even more poignant in this moment about that greatest collective failure is that just in recent days, in reports by The Guardian newspaper that was written by Florence Hartman and Ed Valimi, is that archive information has emerged from the Clinton Library that indicates that we knew what was happening 6 weeks in advance of those terrible events on July 11th, 1995, and that indeed, not only did we know it, but we chose not to take any preventative action to keep them from actually occurring. I think that this is a particularly damning commentary about the failure as we sit here on this broadcast and talk about all the wonderful things that we have done. And we have. But it cannot be underestimated, the damage, not only to the Bosnian people, but actually, I believe, to the world community that we allowed, with our greatest immoral judgment, to allow these events to take place. And so I think that these assertions that now are emerging haven't been denied by anybody that was involved in the government. And I will offer one mitigating circumstance for President Clinton, who did tell my former boss, Frank McCloskey, that the Brits in the Security Council blocked any efforts by the United States to engage in an armed intervention to stop the massive killing in Bosnia. But I will say, no one has denied these reports, and it puts, I think, into full relief the complete collapse of our moral leadership. In general, Srebrenica, as Ambassador Rapp has indicated, 15 murderers have been convicted ad acti, and we are awaiting final justice for Mr. Kardic and Mr. Mladic. It also, given that that was a UN initiative and sponsored by the UN, it can't be also underestimated the damage done to the UN by its active facilitation of these crimes in Srebrenica. And so I bring these facts up because it brings, once again, and I think it recalls what our moderators just said, that Srebrenica remains a controversy. And these recent reports bring that to the forefront as we prepare to go to Srebrenica this weekend. A lot has been said about Srebrenica. Very clearly, the first conviction in genocide of Mr. Krstić occurred in the crimes committed at Srebrenica. What I would say, the crime committed, yes. Okay. I would just say that the first conviction ad acti of genocide was of Mr. Krstić, and we've been talking about Srebrenica, but I think that the people need to understand just how sweeping and pervasive the violations that occurred of the humanitarian laws of war that were principally carried out against unarmed civilians. And these crimes involve torture, extrajudicial killings, rape, illegal detainment, and enslavement. This is broad and sweeping, and it didn't end at Srebrenica. It actually began before Srebrenica, and many genocides have not been prosecuted. And I would just say, unfortunately, ad acti rape became a prosecutable crime, not done at Tokyo or Nuremberg, but in fact, the testimonies of Bosnian women who survived rape were taken to The Hague by a judge and lawyer from Prijedor who also were enslaved in the Armaska rape camp. Foča was prosecuted, but Vilna Vas in Visegrad to this day really has not been prosecuted for systematic rape and enslavement. And these crimes have traumatized the population of not only the people in the country, but the people that left fleeing for their lives. Many in our own country, 300,000 Bosnian Americans, of which many have survived the Prijedor ethnic cleansing, the Srebrenica cleansing, many of them living in St. Louis, in Utica, New York, in many communities across our country. When you think about that sweeping series of crimes, repetitive over and over and over, I believe that impunity, when many people have not been indicted yet, comes to the forefront now as the importance, as Ambassador Rapp has indicated, of the National War Crimes Courts, and this is a good development. They need to continue to stay the course. I would just say that, as has been pointed out previously, genocide denial remains palpable and evident in the region. And under no circumstances do I believe that President Nikolic nor Prime Minister Vučić should go to Srebrenica this weekend unless they formally apologize to the Bosnian government and to the people that have suffered so deeply. And I would also underscore the comments made here about the role of Russia, which is evident in today's action at the UN Security Council. Fortunately, Secretary Kerry has pointed out the role of Russia and its relationship with Serbia before a House subcommittee on foreign operations earlier this year. But Russian incursions through international organizations, including the Peace Implementation Council, the OSCE, have proved to be problematic, and they indeed carry out a role of destabilization. And this is of concern, and it's one that I think the United States needs to up its game in addressing in the region. And let me also agree with some of the predecessors here on the important role of the United States. Dayton is broken. Dayton does not work anymore. It has been deemed to be, an element of it has been declared to be unconstitutional by the European Court of Human Rights. It needs to be reformed, and a UK-German initiative without reform is no initiative at all. And let me just say, our leadership is important, continues to be important. It is a legacy of the United States. We need to up our game. We need to get more involved in a way that we can help address some issues that Professor Serwer has pointed out. And let me also say, Bosnia is living with depression-level unemployment. Formal unemployment is 40%, and with youth, it's approaching 60%, according to the World Bank. This is simply unsustainable, and people are leaving. And I think what you're seeing is a second brain drain leaving Bosnia, and in fact, the future is leaving Bosnia. These are young people who are well-educated and can't get a job. They cannot work. They cannot feed their families. So while all of these things are sobering, and they are indeed troubling, let me add that what I do see as positive is the organizing around human rights, around the rule of law by youth. We have the May 31st initiative in Prijedor, White Armband Day. We have a peace march that is arriving in Srebrenica. There's a number of initiatives by young people. Indeed, human rights is not a static situation, but the engagement by the NGO community here is very important. And I, again, urge not only the audience, but my colleagues here, that the U.S. remains very important. People are indeed morose and very disturbed by what they see a lack of engagement. So on this note, I do indeed close my remarks, but the lesson here is that when we're confronted with a moral disaster, we need to act. And it will be in our national interest. There will be consequences from these revelations, I believe. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much for my ability to participate today.
Thank you, Professor Domi, very much. I had a couple of questions. I do not want, though, to take time from our distinguished guests here in the audience. I thank you very much for coming, and if you have any questions, please go ahead for any of our panelists. And if not, at this time, I have a question, which actually I would like to ask any of you that would like to answer. Yes, it is great to support prosecution for war crimes, but in a way, as many agreed, and certainly our panelists agreed, a focus on prosecuting for war crimes amount to, in a way, an admission, as Professor Domi said, an admission of failure at the time. Now, at the same time, Professor Serwer said that not even Serbia would support or recognize, if there was a partition of Bosnia, to recognize the Republika Srpska. Well, Serbia probably would not, but judging by the events today, Russia probably would. Now, we have a situation in Ukraine. If anything happens, if Bosnia is again in a conflict because of the horrible political and economic situation, what are the guarantees that anybody would really help prevent this conflict again? Because we can see, if you're not actual NATO member, like what we see in Ukraine, I mean, chances are really that, to be honest, and as Professor Domi said, I'm not a diplomat either, so that nobody would really help. Please, Professor Serwer.
Let me just make a pitch for something I've recommended many times in the past. I think the only people you can expect to react to a possible declaration of independence by Republika Srpska are the Europeans. I just don't think the Americans, I don't think this is even close to the level of attracting more than rhetorical American attention at this stage. The Europeans, we have very few troops on the ground in Bosnia today. The Europeans have not many, but they're spread out all over Bosnia. There's no need for that. To be militarily significant, they would all have to be in one place, and that one place is clearly Brčko. And Brčko is the only place a new war can occur in Bosnia. So the Europeans, I think this is a European job, and I think the Europeans have just about enough troops left in Bosnia to make a valid military point by moving each and every one of them to Brčko and not worrying about the rest of Bosnia. I want to make a comment also, if I may, about Dayton being broken. The problem with Dayton is that it's not broken. It's only been amended once, and that was under terrific international pressure, to acknowledge the Brčko settlement. It's been very difficult to break. And it's difficult to break because it did enshrine and freeze the warring parties in place, and there are real interests behind keeping those warring parties in place. The only way, in my view, of undoing that is to change the political economy of the country so that these folks can't feed off the state any longer as they do today.
Any thoughts? Yes, please, Ambassador
I'd just like
Volker.
to address 2 quick points. One of them, your question was, what is the guarantee that we would not allow such a thing to happen again? And the answer is there is no guarantee. It depends upon the decisions made by leaders at the time. And that's what we have to remember. There's no magic formula. There's no automaticity to anybody doing anything. It's the decisions that people make. And so we have to really focus our attention on what leaders are deciding at the moment they need to decide. The second point, and it gets exactly to what Dan was saying and also to something that Professor Domi mentioned. Dan was talking about the Europeans being in the lead on the ground right now. The U.S. wouldn't even register with us. That's probably true. That was exactly the case in Srebrenica 20 years ago, that the Dutch were on the ground. You had the EU force there. The U.S. was saying the Europeans will handle this. The Europeans were saying we'll handle this. And that's one of the reasons why, yes, in fact, we did know what was going on. And we were talking to some of our European colleagues about it. And they were just not willing to act. And it was those decisions that people made, both on the European side and then the U.S., by not overturning that, that we allowed it all to happen.
Thank you.
Can I say something here? Could I?
Yes, Professor Domi, go ahead, please.
Just really quickly. I hear what Professor Serwer is saying about, in fact, the Dayton Agreement isn't broken. However, there's been a ruling by the European Court of Human Rights, and it says an element of the Dayton Agreement is, in fact, unconstitutional. There are a number of people that are involved in politics there, that indeed want this to be addressed, need to have it addressed.
Professor Domi, I'm sorry, we lost you again. If you can hold your thought for a second, Ambassador Rapp wanted to say something. We'll come back to you immediately.
I wanted to follow up on this question, of course, that when you have convictions of to respond, to know what's happening at the time, and frankly, often we do not. We also have to. What can we do to bring peace? What can we do to avoid the conflict? If we insult one side, if we talk about what their leaders are doing, they'll be less likely to go to the peace table. And we recognize now, and with the President's establishment of an Atrocity Prevention Board, that actually focusing on the conduct, the horrible things that some forces are committing, recognizing that we need to call that down. We need to talk about when a Mladic talks about walking into Srebrenica and being knee-deep in blood, we need to denounce those particular statements at the time. And I think now we've awakened to a greater extent to the conduct during the conflict and the need, frankly, though it can make negotiating peace more difficult, but to call acts what they are, to call down hate speech, to counter it, and to respond to atrocities when they're being committed. And then, to the extent we put peacekeepers in there, that we give them the arms and the mandate sufficient to protect civilians. Not easy, never will be easy, but we've learned from Srebrenica, whether we, and clearly now in Syria, with the absence of a global consensus, we're not able to deal with it. In other places we are. But the challenge will be using the doctrines that we've developed effectively in other places.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rapp. We have a question. Yes, please, can you introduce yourself?
My name name is Alex Grigoriev. I'm from Russian service, and thank you for a brilliant presentation. I'd like, I just check website of Russian foreign minister and type word Srebrenice, and no reference there about this genocide. But any comments about that?
Kurt, you're the Russian
I have a comment that is completely unexpected, I suppose, or very different from what you have in mind. The Russians are extremely good at strategic communications. They understand that the purpose of government communications is to influence and has nothing to do with reality. And so why would they choose to say anything about something that doesn't reflect well on them? Just don't say anything at all. Mm-hmm. And instead, they'll find something to say that causes people to think or to believe or to act in a certain way that is beneficial to them. I wish we were that good.
Yes, Jela from the Serbian language programs. We're a little bit over the time, but now we have all these questions.
Wasn't it predictable, let's say to the Brits, that Russia would put a veto on the draft resolution? And so what was the motivation to go through this process then?
Just because someone vetoes doesn't mean it's not worth raising. I think it's important to raise it, and if someone's going to veto, expose that too. I think we don't do that often enough.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, we obviously had the situation last year when we supported the French resolution, and 13 countries did to send the Syrian situation to the ICC. Russia and China vetoed it. Russia's vetoed other efforts to sanction the Assad regime, et cetera. Obviously, sometimes it's really important to try to build a consensus, but on matters of principle, and certainly on this question of what the crime was that was committed at Srebrenice. So that's not something where crossing that word out and using some other tough language would I think, honor the victims of this crime and would have been dismissive of actions by organizations established to provide independent justice in the case of the former Yugoslavia. So it was an issue that needed to be presented, and Russia's been exposed today for denying the reality of the crime that was committed at Srebrenica 20 years ago.
Dan? Thank you. Mr. Serwer, do you have a comment?
Well, to me, this question of the G word, the genocide word, look, I understand that it has great political significance and is important in this context, but there is nothing nice about mass murder, and that's certainly what occurred.
I would like, we have more questions. If I can just, one more question, and I would like two more questions. I'm sorry. I hope our guests have time, and I would like to finish with Professor Domi because she was interrupted by satellite. So Professor Domi, if you can bear with me, two more questions, and then we go back to you for the last word.
Sami Kastrati, DCM at the Embassy of Kosovo here in DC. I used to work as a journalist at the ICTY prior to joining diplomatic service. Probably I can help in this regard. Thank you, Ambassador Rapp, Ambassador Volker, Professor Serwer. We all agree that the crime of genocide took place in Srebrenica and in Bosnia, as Ambassador Rapp referred, at least in 2 cases, if I remember correct. I used to cover also the ICJ when Bosnia and Herzegovina versus Serbia and Montenegro at the time. And as I do remember, the decision which was rendered by ICJ stated that Serbia was found responsible not to prevent the crime of genocide in Bosnia. My question to you is what the international community needs to do in order to impose the certain states to pay the remedies or damages caused to a certain people or a country. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody?
Well,
Ambassador Rapp.
The question of reparations was obviously raised in that particular case. Frankly, these are matters that have to be negotiated between the states, and what we've done with international bodies is established clearly the responsibility, and it's for us to follow that up and to make sure that the resources are available to repair the damage done to the survivors of horrendous crimes like the genocide at Srebrenica.
Thank you. We have one more question. We're going back then to Professor Domi for the last word, please. Yes, please. Thank you. And if you can introduce yourself, thank you very much.
My name is Dusan Vujicic. I'm a political counselor in the Embassy of Serbia. I'm not sure that I have a question, actually. It's more a comment on a few remarks that Professor Domi made in regard with the apologies that should be made. And I just would like to remind you all that former President of Serbia, Boris Tadic, was in Srebrenice in 2005. In 2013, current President Tomislav Nikolic apologized, saying that he is kneeling on his knees and asking for forgiveness for crime in Srebrenica. In the meantime, in 2010, we had a declaration of National Assembly that issued an apology for war crime in Srebrenica as it is determined by the ruling of the International Court of Justice. And I presume that all these facts speak for themselves, as well as the fact that Prime Minister Vučić is going to attend the ceremony in Srebrenica this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is correct. Prime Minister Vučić has announced that he will be going almost no matter what to bow his head in front of these graves. Thank you very much. Professor Domi, last words. We really have to wrap up. We're a little bit over the satellite, but I think we're still rolling on the satellite. So go ahead, please. We don't. Give us a second, Professor Domi. I'm sorry, but we knew this was going to be a problem. We knew that, so we took our risk. Give us a second. No? Can you talk to her and tell her that maybe she cannot hear me, that we are losing? You can hear me. I'm sorry we cannot hear you, unfortunately. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you, but we, regardless, Professor Domi, Ambassador Rapp, Ambassador Volker, Professor Serwer, thank you very, very much. I think in spite of these little problems, technical problems, Skopje is very far away. But we really had a wonderful discussion, very meaningful. And if any of you have a last word other than that, we would wrap up today. And just want to let everybody know that this was a live stream on our internet site on the Voice of America. And also many affiliates in the region were taking over this live, and will take, those who didn't will take the whole program when we repeat it. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for today, for coming today. Thank you.